Hey everybody, Wade and Evan here with another episode of our Last of Us recap of season 2 as we make our way toward the penultimate episode next week. Can you believe it? We've got 2 after this one. So third from the end here as we are recapping The Last of Us. Evan, as we get going, before we get into the specifics, what do you think of this episode? Episode, what is this, 5? Feel Her Love?
I felt the love this episode. No, I felt a little disgusted. I am certainly curious, and we are moving at a pace that we weren't sure how they were going to structure this season. And the answer is, we're going, and so you better get on board. What did you think?
It feels fast. It feels really, really fast to me. That may be because when I played the game, I died so many times.
I died a lot in the sections that were covered in this episode.
Man, me too. And like, I really thought that this episode that the events of this episode might end this season. But now that I'm thinking back to it, I'm like, maybe that wasn't that much gameplay. Maybe I'm just bad at the game.
Potentially, but we've also inverted some different structure, and we've assigned some of the roles in the story. It's spread out across more characters, which we'll get into, talking about the distinction between that and some of the things for the game. But you're absolutely right.
This episode kind of hits like the proverbial brick in the face, to use another Last of Us
Or pipe to the knee.
Or pipe to the knee. Or really anything grotesque and maybe a little overboard, which we'll certainly get into
Plenty
today.
of that in this episode.
So if you are, for whatever reason, just tuning in now, we are so grateful to have you. Thank you so much for liking, subscribing, watching. What an episode to jump into, because we're going to be really diving into some things. One of the things we like to do is we go kind of straight through the episode, kind of commenting, analyzing, and we've got a lot of pit stops today. So it's important that you just kind of, if you're the note-taking type, we're going to throw out some things that you may really want to take some notes on. So with that, why don't we start at the top? Cold open.
We love cold opens in this show. We love the cold opens. Anytime it opens up and it's a new cold open, I get so excited.
They always are able to give us like a new element or some teaser for this episode. And in this episode, it was the introduction of the much awaited for spores.
We have to talk about the spores.
Man, we have to. And I'm so glad because, you know, as I was watching this episode, I thought to myself, man, spores are a really big part of this episode and the sequence in the game. And they have never introduced them before. They're in the first game, but they weren't in the first season. And so it was really important to introduce them if they were going to go kind of the same route with this, which, as we see by the end, they really needed to go the same route with it.
Yes.
But that means they had to introduce a really key element early on and quickly and make it pay off an hour later, which, you know, is wild. Do you think they succeeded, this opener?
I think they did. I thought it was really nice to hold that in the back pocket and then make sure that you leverage it for kind of maximum emphasis, because it got all the gravitas of the idea that the spores exist in addition to the scene that we'll later explore where it's kind of that pivotal tension. But up until this point in the story, there's been nothing that necessitated the spores existing. So I love that they're still there. And what it tells me too is that they are aware of all the things that they're couching, and there's reasons and intentionality, potentially, probably, behind why they do introduce certain concepts or don't introduce certain concepts. And they want to keep the viewer guessing, even if you've played all the games and know what the main story beats were in those playthroughs.
Well, it is such an interesting thing in this episode because it sets up Ellie as having a superpower. You know, in the game, everybody has gas masks. They've known about this and they've known how to overcome it. But here, they're first discovering it. They're reeling a little bit. And I didn't see a gas mask at all in this whole thing. And so now Ellie, being immune, is just able to walk around. And it kind of creates this whole new, it almost reminded me of like Predator or Terminator. You've just got this like, monstrous entity coming at you, and like you're running for your life, but she is completely unfazed. That's kind of what we get at the end. But it strikes me because in this cold open, back to the point here, they are so scared, and you see the tremble in their faces, their voices, and the whole deal. And it's like, what? But they don't show it. And that makes for such a great payoff at the end of this episode. So I thought it was a great open.
That's a great point, and I hadn't really ever thought about the fact that by doing this, they're giving Ellie a superpower. I love the way that you described that, because that's just not where my brain went, but you said it, I was like, yes, actually, that's a really, really good idea, and I'm going to have to think about what that would mean for the rest of the story and how they might use it narratively. That's a really great point. But speaking of superpowers, we turn to the superpower that is math, with Dina and Ellie later in the radio tower as Dina's in the radio room triangulating where maybe some of these things are going to happen in the city so that they can know where to go. They have a little bit of an exchange.
They're in the theater, right? Isn't it the theater?
But on top of the theater in the game, there's a radio room.
That's right.
And that's where Dina... So in the game, Dina kind of exists mostly in this radio room for a while, where Ellie kind of goes out and does her little adventures, and then Dina's kind of in the radio room still trying to figure things out. So this is an allusion to that, I would say, in the game. But then they kind of subvert her expectations a little bit after some banter, because they're changing some things with who's responsible for certain parts of the story here. What do you think about that, and where would you introduce that concept?
You know, I am fuzzy on the details of the game at this point, because I'm replaying it really for the second time, for the first time in 5 years. And so I'm looking forward to thinking about how the game does it on Tuesday and Thursday night of this week, versus, kind of going in blind, because all of this feels really fresh to me. And some of it is fresh because it's not told the same way. The Dina stuff, like, it's interesting because, first of all, I know we've said this so many times, but every scene that Dina is in, she just shines. Like, everything, the emotion, the range and the depth, and I am just in it. And I'm like, Dina, lead us into the apocalypse, right? But there's an interesting juxtaposition here, and they even comment on it, where Dina says, I've got this. I'm kind of working on triangles and all this kind of stuff. And Ellie's like, well, let me be a part. No, it's okay. Is it because I'm dumb? Is it because you're so smart and I'm dumb? And it's like a really interesting kind of riffing. I don't remember that from the game.
No,
that's not really part of their characterization.
We're getting into their overt romantic dynamic now, right?
Yeah.
So everything to me, this is the way that I've experienced it. It seems like before there was always the tension of the will they, won't they, and we're done with the tension of will they, won't they, because they did. So now we have to start to build on what the next dynamic is going to be if they're going to be complex characters. So complex characters and a complex dynamic that's going to get us through the rest of the episode. This is where you start building what that dynamic is, because they've turned a corner, I would say, narratively. Yeah. So we can't lean into the same things that got us here. We have to start building what's going to be next to support what's going to happen in the events of the story. So that's kind of how I'm interpreting it. This is that playfulness, a little bit of banter. Now that they're both open with each other, what does it look like? A little boundary crossing, boundary violation kind of thing. Yeah. I didn't really appreciate the way that you picked on me, maybe kind of, and maybe that's me reading into it a little bit more. That Ellie kind of wanders off into the auditorium, and we kind of wonder.
But before they do, we got to talk about the look, right? Like look of like Dina and Ellie both look at one another with this endearing, loving gaze, right?
Very much so.
It's such good, just kind of framing. They don't need to say a word there. You just kind of know, hey, they're just enchanted by one another, and just a really great scene. So
another great example of show don't tell. Where they've told us a lot, but now they're showing us what that looks like, and the actors are showing that to us as well here.
So then they go down to Ellie goes down to the auditorium, and as soon as she walked in there, I was so excited. I think I texted you. I was like, guitar scene. So.
Well, we talked a little bit about this when it transpired, because the guitar scene is something that's a little bit iconic in the game. Now, I'll say it's not really some huge spoiler thing, the fact that Ellie plays the guitar in the auditorium. So we're not really getting too far ahead of ourselves. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about what happens in the game and why it's impactful, so that this will make sense to anyone. So in the game, Ellie sits on the front row and plays the guitar. It's a reflective moment. And I'll just probably leave it there unless you want to add anything about it. Okay, so...
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I'll say is, like, in the game, it's a very reflective moment. And here, it's a different kind of reflective moment, because it's a non-starter for her.
Totally.
And that's what's cool about this scene to me.
Yeah, so visually, she doesn't sit on the front row. She sits on the stage, right? And so it's very... I'm going to read into this a little bit visually, and then I'd love your thoughts. So... in the grief process, the guitar is symbolism for some of that processing of her grief and the loss of Joel.
Yeah.
So that is true. I think music and art is part of how we tend to process complex emotions. And so I think they are trying to say something with that here. But there is a subversion where she's not sitting on the front row like an audience member. So if you sit on the front row, you're a participant in watching something else, but they have her sit on the stage and start to play the guitar. And it looks out over an empty auditorium. And that to me alludes to maybe the performative nature of how you can process grief and loss in those times versus the authentic nature. So I think we might see a scene where she revisits and there's some more genuine processing where she's on the front row observing her grief, not displaying her grief as some kind of performance to the world. So to me, that was an interesting subversion. And I think that there's something there that they're trying to say, because she starts to sing a little bit and she just kind of can't. And I would say, you and I talked about this. It doesn't seem like she's ready yet. But what do you make of that, especially given what we talked about grief before? And you think I'm off a little bit here?
I don't think you're off. The comparison between her being on the front row and on the stage was important to me too. And I was asking the question, why would they put her on the stage here, and why can't she finish the song there? And it really was. It made me think about how she's the main character of this game. You know, and like in the first game, she's kind of the escort mission for Joel, or in the first season rather. But here, she's really taken center stage, and it's almost like the spotlight and the expectations that maybe she's put upon herself are just too great for her at this point. Yeah. In fact, I think that that's something that I'm kind of seeing again and again in this season. Ellie. And maybe it's Bella's depiction of Ellie, but Ellie just feels very almost stoic in a lot of ways.
Sure.
I think if I were critical, I might say that it's flat, but it feels intentional in a lot of ways. And so I'm not sure that it's necessarily that. It's almost like Ellie is dealing with a sense of kind of trauma paralysis emotionally, and is just kind of being, she's like, this is what I have to do. And other people are like guiding her into it. I think of the very next scene where Dina's kind of like her Sherpa into revenge narratives.
Yeah, well, that I think that's going to be important to talk about. So whether it's intentional or not, I will say the performance is significantly less nuanced and emotive, especially when you weigh it against the performance of Dina in these episodes. There's a lot less going on. There's a lot less subtleties in the eye motion. I'm specifically drawn to the scene where they're doing trigonometry, and Dina is casually holding herself in an intentional way that the character would, and she just kind of in acting, there's a couple different things that performers will do. In some interviews, they talk about this, that you do where you break the eyes compared to the head movement in gravitas, or to like add gravity to something. Gary Oldman has a clip that you can look up online where somebody says, what are some acting tricks? And he's on some kind of talk show. And he says, I will say there's one thing that I've learned. It's that if you want to look menacing, you move the head before you move the eyes. And so then he demonstrates it. And so once I listened to that interview, I started to pay more attention to the timing of the subtleties and why certain things felt authentic to me and felt natural compared to things that felt more performative. And I feel like Dina's character feels very natural to me in her acting. And if you watch the scene where she's looking over the maps and she's triangulating, you'll notice that she's able to keep her eyes on the page, move her head, and then she uses that subtle eye movement and a few micro expressions to convey the emotion that she's feeling, and then she goes back down to the map. It's, I think, in my opinion, phenomenal acting. Whereas Bella seems like she is hiding something there with the way that she's acting. Now, whether that's intentional or not, I can't not make note of the difference in the performances.
Well, the performative nature of Ellie, I think, is being conveyed in a couple of ways. First of all, she's on that stage. In this entire season, she's on a revenge narrative. But here we get a poignant glimpse of her center stage spotlight, and she becomes reflective. And it's something that reminds her of Joel, you know, and she's just not going to do that because it softens her. It was also interesting to me that Dina is talking about triangulating, right? And I mean, this is a great psychological term as well, right? Whenever you've got something between you and someone else, oftentimes we'll bring in a third to try to get around at that thing. And that's exactly what Ellie is doing. I mean, did you think about this? Like,
that's why I love talking to you about these things specifically, because your perspective and experience is different than mine. And you draw my attention to different things. And I like, that's why we're doing this, is why we record it and release it, rather than you and I just talking on the phone or like in person.
Because it's interesting. It deepens.
It is interesting. It's interesting to share
appreciation.
It too. Yeah.
And so, Ellie, instead of just dealing head on with the grief and the issues that she had with Joel, she has now triangled Abby into this narrative, okay? And in this moment on the stage, she is getting in touch with Joel again, and she's like, no, that's not what this is about. But it is what it is about. She's just taking the long way to get there, and a much bloodier and more harsh way to get there as well.
Do you think it's exploring both the prophet and the way that Joel might have felt her love?
Oh,
anyways,
feel this love.
So the guitar scene ends, and we go outside with Dina and Ellie. So we're going to move pretty quickly through this because the action sequence, the action sequences happen.
We've spent longer on these scenes than they did.
Yeah, so they're chatting longer and louder than they probably should for some kind of active war zone. But let's get past that. They move through the streets. They have their guns. They're walking around, and they see some. These are the wolves that have been. No, these are scars that have been slaughtered.
They're scars
at the side of the building, and they're very horrified by this slaughter. So, and it's a big reaction that I don't. It seems a little outsized to the situation, but they leverage it to talk about Dina's backstory a little bit. So Dina and Ellie have this collective experience of horror from what has happened to these individuals who have been killed, and we learn this extra part of Dina's backstory. Now, this, to my recollection, is nowhere present in the story of the game. This is a brand new experience and a brand new interpretation of kind of the themes of this story and Dina's character, unique to the show. So this is actually a really big deal for us. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that was, and then let's talk a little bit about where they could be going and why they would do that from a narrative structure next.
Well, first of all, I think you're exactly right. The sight of these dead scars or seraphites, it's not as traumatic as the bodies that were hanging in the radio tower to me. And so it's like, y'all have seen bodies before. Y'all have inflicted bodies before. Like, but I guess it's a little different now because they're like a soon-to-be family, and so it's like, oh, not in my house.
Maybe the stakes are different. That's interesting. There is a child involved. They talk about what they're going to name the child, so maybe they're trying to explore the differences in the stakes given that. But I don't know. It
kind of harkens back to like the Bill and Frank episode where Bill said to Frank, "I was never afraid before I met you." And maybe that's something here. It's like they're not just afraid for themselves because they're capable, but they're afraid for their family and that future now. So
that's a great point.
Maybe I'll give them a little bit of grace with that. But
I like that lens.
Yeah, we're going to accept that one. So at this point, Ellie is definitely, again, she's trying to protect her family. And she's like, Dina, God, we shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here. Like, you got to go back. And Dina, with just this fiery resolve, talks about her own revenge narrative, which I don't remember being in the game at all. And maybe it's not, or
I really don't think it is. And if it is, I missed it. It'd be interesting if you played it a couple of times and I played it recently and we both didn't catch up on any of it. But maybe it was like a letter or something. But I was really into like the journal, and I played this game in a pretty more detailed way than I typically play narrative games, because you know me. So I was pretty locked in on this.
You watched the cutscenes and read the journal.
I did. Listen, Final Fantasy 14 is an aside. Okay, like I love everybody, and I love you.
Totally
folks.
Get it.
And
you like the gold saucer, and who can blame you?
I'm a little person, but I just, anyways. Okay, what's the name of the little people?
Podcast. The Lalafell.
All right, that's me. All right, so anyways.
That was a great moment for you to yell "nerd alert." I mean, that I would have accepted. I mean, like, yeah, it's true.
We try to make this a no judgment zone as much as possible, both for each other and for the listeners.
Feel this love.
We want, feel this love. We want to be positive about the way that we engage with things. So we now have a correlating revenge narrative that Dina's character has had that we don't have before. So this makes me ask a lot of questions. So I don't want to overanalyze it too much, but I think we do have to ask the question, why are we changing what happens in the game? And the analogy that came to mind for how we would do this is maybe a little different, because the entire time we have been putting Dina in positions to be a co-carrier of the rage and revenge narrative with Ellie. We've talked about it a little bit, about some of the changes that have happened from episode to episode. Just to highlight one in particular, it's that Dina was in the cabin, and Dina was put to sleep by Nora, right? Yeah, Nora puts her to sleep.
Pretty sure it was, yeah.
Yeah, with the and so she's present in the cabin for the murder of Joel, which is not the case in the game. So whenever they change something like that, we ask ourselves the question, well, why might this be? Well, we left that question open-ended, but I think we started to maybe see the answer to it here. So in the game, you only control 2 characters. And in the game, you control Abby and you control Ellie. So everything from the story that you experience that isn't some sort of cutscene is essentially through the lived perspective of Ellie and Abby. So every theme that's explored, every decision that you make, the only way to move the game and the story forward is to follow through with the choices that they make and to experience them with depth and repetition. In a television show, the way that we experience things with depth is not always through repetition with the same character, because we don't have the same connection. You talk a lot about the difference between what it's like to play a video game and we experience it with the characters, and compared to watching something transpire. I wonder if now would be a good time to talk and remind us a little bit of what the science says about what happens when we control a character in a game versus when we watch a character on a screen.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of why I love gaming so much, because just by having agency of moving the character, the game is imprinting, or that experience is imprinting first-person memories where you actually remember the fear, the emotionality, as though it were happening to you, not just a fear for those that are on screen. And that's what's really interesting about this. And so Craig and Neil and the entire team for this reimagining of the story, they've got a really lofty task, really difficult to get people in that same sort of mindset, and I think that this is an incredibly challenging sort of thing to try to do, because fans of the game, I mean, that's like talking about your grandma, right? Like, it's like I have memories of my grandma, and like I sat in her lap, and like that's my whole thing. And now they're trying to change some aspects of that. And so some of us are very guarded in that same respect.
Yeah, they're messing with our memories and our nostalgia, which you've mentioned before, the power of nostalgia, both in storytelling and in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm kind of torn on this, because it's like, I like what they're doing, but at the same time, it doesn't quite feel the same. And that's more of a me thing, right?
Well, it's not the same.
The controller's in my hand. Right?
Yeah, it's not the same, and that's important to say. Okay, I think it's analogy time. So if in the game, if we think of the task of breakthrough into something having meaning, think about how oversaturated we can be with information and drama and stories and all the different things that move across screens. So when you play a game, or you have an experience, or you watch a movie, and you felt like it really spoke to you, that you experienced something outside your everyday life, we have to think of that as it punched through something. It punctured through some kind of veil or barrier that we have to something that doesn't have meaning, to something that we accept has meaning. So if we think of that like a frozen lake in this analogy, okay? Yeah. So think of the ice is really thick on this frozen lake, and the story's job is to try and get to the meaning. It has to get through the ice. Yeah. In the video game, you have 2 sharp characters that you get a lot of time with, that you put a lot of the weight of the story on. So when you just put that weight, all you have to do to break through, the player's going to finish it. The only way for the player to know what's going to happen next is to continue to control the character and observe and impact their decision-making through their play. But it limits you in what you can do. So as you stack that weight upon that, the smaller that item is, the faster it's going to punch through that ice. So that's the way that they use this weight of the storytelling. Over and over again, you experience things, you get that nuance. And so it breaks through that ice into that meaning, right? That liquid water underneath the ice gets to that meaning of something that really had impact on our lives. Now, in the story that they're telling now with the show, they're dividing up some of the weight that they place on just the characters of Ellie and Abby, because we don't experience them, we don't control them, we're observing them. So as they spread that out across Dina and Jesse and Tommy and other characters to explore some of these revenge narratives, the overall weight of that is going to have to be greater in order to break through that ice and achieve that meaning for us, whereas they could focus it on those two characters. This is the only way that my brain has been able to process when and why and how you would do that. Now, in a television show, it's interesting because it's important that you see yourself in more than one character, because you don't get to live that experience for 20 and 30 hours with them. You're only going to get about an hour of total screen time, maybe a little bit more for some of the side characters. So seeing yourself in the different personalities to be able to explore those narratives could be a way to help what is a very deep and thoughtful experience, living it with the character in the video game, become translated into a more acceptable, palatable experience in the show. But the overall weight, I think, is going to have to be greater in order for them to actually break through and have the emotional resonance that they're looking for compared to the game. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. And so whatever was part of one character's original revenge narrative, I'm mostly okay with it having representation in new ways in the show, right?
Mostly okay is a great way to say that.
Mostly okay. I'm just interested.
I'm curious.
I'm curious. I will say this: whatever they're doing with Dina has made me much, much softer on Dina. I actually didn't. I hate to say this. I didn't much care for Dina in the game.
Sure.
But that was just my preference.
You're allowed to have preferences.
She felt like, for the game at least, it wasn't a characterization or a performance issue at all. It was much more of, I'm kind of like Ellie. Like, why is she here? Like, she needs to go home. Like, she is a liability at this point. Here, though, I'm like, she's actually giving Ellie some strength and some bolstering of courage and meaning. But it's also an interesting kind of mirror into the life that could be, So it's a reminder of, like, at any moment, you can not go forward with this.
We alluded to that a few episodes ago as we talked about those off-ramps that we can have in life where we have the opportunity, and that this could be really one of the first off-ramps that Ellie's ever been offered. In the game, Dina represented my voice as the person controlling Ellie. Most often, whatever Dina was saying was what my head was screaming at Ellie as a character to do. So in changing some of Dina's ownership of the revenge narrative, I'm curious what that contrast is going to be for the behavior and the decisions that we're going to get into, and what I imagine will probably be season 2. Really, the depths of that are not going to happen here. So I don't really want to linger on it too much, but I just want to get ahead of it some.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Dina tends to represent the astronomical cost that is at stake here for Ellie's future and livelihood. And Ellie is just kind of going through life pretty numb, and Dina is giving some humanization and the full range of it, right? I mean, like in this episode, she kind of, I don't want to say cheerleads, but kind of fans the flames of revenge in a revenge narrative, which is a very human thing. And Ellie is like this numb sponge that's like, okay, yes. And then occasionally she'll get fired up, but then it's back to this, I'm not going to show humanity because that's weak.
It's a very intense portrayal of what it looks like to support your partner in their decisions.
Yeah.
That this is, here's the deal, there's two paths. I could see this go either way, but really this is your decision and I'm going to support what it is. That happens when you're with somebody long enough in a healthy relationship. You have those conversations of, listen, I believe in you. This isn't a thing that I'm kind of good either way here, but because we're connected and walking this path together, I want to make sure that I can fully support what you're doing. And Dina does that check-in where she asks, what do you want to do? And in a well-delivered line, very almost imperceptibly, barely spoken, like the words just kind of, she had to open her mouth and let them escape in a whisper. She says, I want to keep going.
I want to keep going. Yeah. And it's like, I almost don't believe her, right? Like, I don't want to, but I have to.
It is very believable that she is kind of not sure, and it's maybe
Yeah.
some of the first signs of some waffling on like the monolithic motivation of revenge, which I thought was neat.
Yeah, I mean, it's just gotten me thinking now. I'm kind of reanalyzing every scene with Ellie, and it's like she is on a fated course of revenge, and like it's stolen not just the nice parts of her, but it's stolen all of her humanity. She feels very hollow to me, I think, in the show's telling. Whereas like in the game, I really did feel like she was a little bit more, I don't know, just maybe it's because I was controlling her. I just felt a closeness to her, but she feels very hollow, stoic, and like doing her own thing. And then she has
Aloof.
these moments of humanity. They're usually drawn out by Dina and like family and this idea of reclaiming things. That's given me some things to think about. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the video game character of Ellie does a lot of wrestling, and I think is very complicated.
Yeah,
This Ellie does not seem to be doing a ton of
no,
wrestling and seem particularly complicated. If it is wrestling, it's not being conveyed to us particularly in the way that they're telling the story. Others may have a different opinion, but for me, it definitely seems like we're getting a much more stoic Ellie, and I don't think that's just lack of control of the
no.
character. I think it is the portrayal and the contrast between other characters in the scenes add to the fact of that stoicism and more of the I think on one hand some would call it simplicity, on
Yeah.
the other hand some would call it like stoicism, right? So depending on what that is, maybe we're dealing with a little different Ellie in the way that they're telling the story. We're not really gonna get the answers that we need right now, but also it's very, very bad commentary to say things like "time will tell," so we won't do
True.
that.
Well, it
But
also reminds me of the thing that Gail said to Tommy on the baseball field,
okay,
right? Ellie's a liar. Okay.
ooh, good pull.
And so, if that is true, then the things that she is saying about this revenge narrative and arc, they're a lie that for some reason she's latched onto.
Very interesting.
And I'm really interested to see how that resolves.
I miss Gail.
Ugh. I think everybody would be better if they were like just had a little session with Gail right now.
I miss Gail.
I miss her.
It's okay. So
Maybe she
I'll
shows
move.
up with Tommy and Jesse. Who knows?
Well, that gets us to our next point.
Exactly.
So I'll move us really, really quickly through this part. They go down into this kind of place. There's the creepy, talky, little sneaky ones that are
Stalkers.
stalkers that are creepy, talky, little sneaky ones.
Yeah, that's their full name, but I
Yeah,
like stalkers.
That's good. The stalkers. Ellie sends Dina into this cage so that she could be protected while she fights the stalkers. Things seem lost. They run out of ammunition, and then we hear the cacophony of two big booms off screen, and we see a shadowy figure with a flashlight who is saving the day or coming to finally kill Ellie and Dina. Oh, it's Jesse.
It's Jesse.
And Jesse's back, and we love Jesse. So welcome back, Jesse. What do
Yeah,
you
we
make
love
of
Jesse.
Jesse coming back, the way that they reintroduced him, and then go ahead and take us through their escape and into the woods, and then we'll pick up in the woods scene, and I'm going to hand it off to you from here.
Yeah, I mean they go right, and so this first of all, while they are in duress, Ellie has this like final plan of like, hey, go to the cage, and I can get bit so many times, like I have no worry whatsoever, which are things that I yelled at the character in the game. I'm like, you can get bit, don't worry about this, just like go. So I'm glad that that was represented in this this HBO telling. So anyway. Jesse shows up when Ellie is being just overrun and going to be consumed at this point, and he gets them out of there. I mean, it's not, it's heroic, but it's also not like triumphant. They're still in danger.
Yeah.
So they're on the run, and they're slightly catching up, and Jesse has this notion that they're going to go back. Like Ellie, Dina, Tommy, and Jesse, they're going to get safe, and then the next day they're going back home just to get out of this war zone. And Ellie's like, no, we are not doing that. They make their way into the park. And then this is what I was really excited for, because it's such an iconic part of the game. The depiction of the Seraphites, the scars, in their robes, with their torches, whistling to one another, and you're just in the darkness. And we commented to each other. We couldn't see a darn thing in this episode. It was so dark. And
we watched it during the day.
We watched it during the day.
Night. We just got back from PAX. It was awesome, but we watched it during the day instead of at night. So we probably have a little more energy and pep because it's not 11:30 at night.
That's
but
also true, yeah.
We had a hard time distinguishing some of the dark scenes while
you were
we
like, "Is that a dog?" And I was like, "It barks." So yeah, so it's a tell.
It's a surefire way to know it's a dog.
We're on it. This is the kind of commentary you tune in for.
This is what you come here for, everybody.
That's a dog. I've seen one of those. So they're in the woods and they see this really horrific act, right?
Yeah.
So the Seraphites have caught a wolf, a WLF. What is it? Washington Liberation
Front.
Yep. Okay. So I was like.
Too many acronyms.
I wanted to say it was like World Liberation Federation, but that sounded like a wrestling thing. And I was like, I'm not really sure that's what it is. So the wolf, they caught one. And they're going through this very ceremonial sort of thing. And you know this is what I live for, right? I just love the religious lens, the how are people making sense and meaning of their world. And so they are executing this wolf. And they're going to hang him. But not only that, they've got a sickle, right? And what they proceed to do, I think I texted you. I was like, this is fascinating because in one of the accounts of Judas's death in the New Testament, the record says that he hung himself on a tree and his entrails came out there. And it kind of, the land was like bloodied by him. It was kind
poisoned,
of a
even
cursed,
some interpretations. Yeah,
land. And I thought that was such an interesting thing here because it kind of, to the keen viewer, they're going to see, okay, the scars believe the wolves aren't just their enemies, but they are traitorous and traitorous to this religion. So there's a slight Judas Iscariot aspect. I would love to do an entire podcast about Judas Iscariot, by the way. But this particular scene here was like, okay, this is more than just rivalry. This is like almost religious offense.
Personal aside for that, it was a really interesting thing in my life when I was reading different scriptures and I read and I hear a voice of reason that I think ring out in the course of the dialogue, especially in the Gospels. And every time I'm like, oh, who was that? I agree with that. And it was like, said Judas. And I was like, oh, no. Oh, no.
That's it. I mean, it's...
the emotions and intellectual process of all the disciples, the one that I relate to is the betrayer. What do I do with this? But the show does a good job kind of opening that door and making you think about those kinds of things if you have those kind of personal experiences, to your point.
That's right. And so this was, I felt like it was such a great allusion to that. And so it really, again, what is it? Dina likens them to the Amish, but then like to the nth degree or whatever. And I think that that's really where it stops. They do seem archaic. They're not using guns. They're kind of living out in the wilderness, but they are militant about feeling her love. Right?
I took that as a commentary on the general concept of fanaticism. And what it would be to be a fanatic, and that the Amish were a healthy expression of fanaticism because they kept it contained to themselves, their own practices, their beliefs, and they existed in this space, and they wanted to gain the benefits of a different time as far as society goes, so they created that without expressing it outwardly, versus the scars as a contrast that they're violently expressing their fanaticism. I thought that was an interesting balance to bring, and because at first when they brought up the Amish, I was like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't really see how this could be relevant. But then when you balance that against the violent nature of the scars, I think they're doing probably the best job that they can to show there's different expressions of fanaticism and what does it look like to have it one way versus another. That's the only contrast that I could really find in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably the best. I mean, some things are just like pretty... like it's plain as day.
You got to get it in, so we're just going to say it plainly.
And like if you're not really understanding, think Amish, but like really, really bad, like and violent Amish. So in fact, I wouldn't even say violent Amish because that's a disrespect to the Amish, and that's not what this is at all. It's just fanaticism, like you said.
That's it. Well, and I think they're showing an example of what it's like to not be violent, like to your point. So yeah, Clearly, no disrespect to the Amish here.
No.
So we then get a very dark escape, and I'll just be honest, somehow Ellie ends up in this scene with Nora that's iconic from the game. There's some dogs involved, and some other stuff happens after the person gets gutted, and they chase them down. They think they're wolves. Tell me anything that you would add before we get to this Nora scene, because I kind of felt like we just teleported into a conversation with Nora.
Rushing. It was rushing. It's like, oh, there's Nora. Haven't seen you since episode 2, but here we are. And I think in the game, like there's like a hospital scene. It felt like hours between theater and this moment. I was like, oh my gosh, we are speed running this. And I guess it's okay. Like it works the show fine. But
well, yeah, there's a whole kind of side plot as to why they would be there, why Nora would be there, that we don't think we have a ton of time to really get into. I'll do my best.
They're not making it matter, I guess. And so, like, for all the characters, okay, so here's kind of my thinking. For all of the characterization that we are getting for Dina and motivations of Jackson and all this stuff, we just don't have any of that for Abby and her crew at this point. And maybe that's kind of the point, right?
Well, and it's tough because in the game, we probably have to just start talking about this.
It's so tough not to. So if you don't want to be spoiled for the game, like fast forward like 3 minutes.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1. It's not a story spoiler for the game per se. It's a gameplay mechanic and subversion spoiler. So this is me talking slowly about it, rambling as a verbal countdown that Wade just gave you. 3, 2, 1. So in the game, when you start playing Abby, you don't know that you're going to be playing Abby in the way that you do. You've played a little bit in a flashback, but you've controlled other characters in flashbacks before. For me, I thought the game was almost over.
I did too.
I was
expecting the end, yes.
I had played it about as long as I had played the first game.
Right.
So I think we're winding down here, and then you start running around as Abby. And I think I've mentioned this in different formats before, but I'll repeat myself here. And then you start picking up items as Abby. Not a big thing, it's whatever. But then I picked up the first piece of experience.
That was the moment I was like, oh my gosh.
Wait, what?
What is this?
Why do I need experience? And then I paused the game to go look at to see where the skill tree would be. And there was an entire skill tree sitting right there. And I put the controller down.
Yeah. Because you realized you got a second half of this game.
It is one of the most memorable moments in video games for me.
Yeah.
It is hard to surprise someone in video games nowadays.
It is. That part surprised me too.
This was not a story twist. This was not a narrative twist. It was a narrative structure and the entire mechanic of the game twist. Yeah. And when they pulled it off for me, and I know for some people it didn't work, but for me, it made me revisit the rest of the story and everything they'd been saying, and they forced me to do it from an entirely different perspective. And it's what the game was good. I was ready to end the game and say, that was another good one. They did a great job. And then I went, this is brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, it's like we say on the show all the time, proximity produces empathy, right? And so the first bit where I was like, I'm playing as this person that I really hate because of the things that we saw during Ellie's side of things. But the more you begin to get in her shoes, you begin to like her. And it's like, yikes, her motivations, they're as good as Ellie's in some ways. And
better.
She's got these, or better, and she's got these very human characteristics. She's not this villain, this monstrous, out there kind of person. She pets dogs. Like, they make a really big deal of dogs in there. And I mean, that's why we saw dogs tonight in the darkness. So,
Was she this person before her father and most of the people she cared about were horrifically murdered? Or
yeah.
is this the person that she's become because of the actions of Joel? And how does that perpetuate cycles of revenge and our identity? And how do we break them? That's what we're exploring this season. But wow.
This is why people really have an issue with this game. And I think anytime a gamer particularly is having this cognitive dissonance between what they know to be true and the person that, when you realize that maybe you're not as virtuous and maybe a little bit more villainous than you realized, that creates a breakdown in you and in your psyche.
It does.
So we're kind of getting to see that a little bit, and that's kind of what happens with this Nora aspect. You see some flashes in Ellie.
You absolutely do. So once I got over the shock of this scene is actually happening right now, which was a shock to Nora when Ellie shows up, and she just kind of starts to question her, and she wants to get the information from Nora about Abby's location.
Yeah.
They've been trying to triangulate, and she has Nora at gunpoint. Nora flings some bandages off. There's a reason why Nora is bandaging someone, and there is someone shown in the other room. In the game, that is a major narrative point, but they haven't introduced it here, so they're holding it in their back pocket, so we're not going to address it. We're just going to note, if you played the game, you noticed some things there.
Everything matters.
If you didn't, there's a guy who is injured. You'll figure it out later when they're ready to tell you. So they start a chase scene, which is a pretty iconic chase scene in the game. And they're in the hospital that we saw in the cold open. We know that to be true. So as Ellie chases Nora, they have some just playful banter while they're running around. And they find themselves at the precipice of a door that was introduced in the beginning of the episode. Yeah. What do you make of their conversation before the chase scene, and walk us through how they go, since you're the one with all the red lights behind you?
Yeah, I'm there in the basement right there. I literally found these red lights. So I loved it. It happened very quickly, and I was like, oh, we're like, Ellie is speaking to Nora. I thought there would be like a more creeping, sneaking sort of thing, but it was just like Nora's bandaging and like washing some things, and then boom, we're in it. The conversation here is like, put that down. And Nora pretty quickly recognizes who it is. Doesn't know her name or anything like that, but she begins to tell this story that creates a flash of humanness, okay? Of like, it sucks that you saw him die like that. No one should have to watch that and witness that. And really, no one should have to endure that. Certainly not for as long as he did. It broke all of us. But then she turns, and you see it in Ellie too. Like, she's starting to soften, tears are starting to well, and that humanness is starting to return, like she had with the guitar and shut it down. And then Nora changes and says that bleep got exactly what he deserved. Okay. And then she tosses things at Ellie, and the chase ensues. I thought that was great because, hey, listen, for what we do on this show and what we do for a living and all that stuff, that conversation could have done something different. Nora could have stayed on that train and been genuine, and Ellie could have stopped.
Another off-ramp.
This one by the, quote, enemy that she doesn't know, but she's beginning to, I think everyone, good, bad, and neutral, are drawing out aspects of Ellie's humanity that either she or circumstance are causing to be shut down.
And they did it in the middle of an action sequence.
In the middle of an action sequence.
To give you that pause. So the way that they play with tension there is really well done. And I think you're a constant reminder of the big and small ways that they're exploring and shaping the narrative, whether it's a big brushstroke or whether it's tiny detailed brushstrokes like this. I think is helpful to kind of reinforce, because as a viewer, this is happening in a little bit of the subconscious. But they're very intentional with the way that they put the details and they place them. And it's the psychological narrative details that aren't necessarily as overt as the visuals. So your perspective and expertise there in your work, I think, is helpful here.
Well, it really strikes me, the more that we've had this conversation today, I feel like, as I've been online and stuff, I see critiques of this season, and certainly of Bella and Bella's portrayal of Ellie. And I want to speak about that just a little bit. And there's been moments when I've been like, man, there are times when Ellie is just falling really flat for me. But then there's these flashes of emotion. And it's like, okay, no, there's capacity there. So what is happening? Like, is this a telling of Ellie that is meant to be just kind of like flat with flashes of humanity? They want you to feel like this is inhuman, static in some ways. Now, whether or not it works is another thing, but I wonder if that's their intention. Because if so, like I said, anytime Ellie and Bella show emotion that hits you, what is that telling us?
I'd love the opportunity to ask them directly.
Craig,
I think
Neil, open seat here.
Yeah, I'd love to. We have a video frame with 4 panels, so you can't bring a third guest. We won't allow it. But if you're willing, just the 2 of you to come on, then that's fine. We already have
way too much production cost to do it.
We can't afford a 5th panel. Okay, we just can't do it.
Real estate is intense.
I think as a concept, and this is one that we don't have a ton of time to explore, but it does ask the question: what does it look like to try and understand something and not just experience it? So when we experience something, I'm standing here going, is this missing the mark, or am I not being patient enough?
Yeah.
Is this missing the mark, or am I not being patient enough? And I think how you would answer that question is going to depend on just your preferences. But I think it also alludes to what happens in our lives as well, where we have a critical eye and a lens that we apply to things. And we will ask ourselves in relationships, in situations, in work circumstances, when we're being creative, is this missing the mark, or am I just not being patient enough? And that's a really difficult tension to manage. But being able to understand that and ask those questions is somehow some of the steps that help us get to some sort of empathy and recognizing that, hey, maybe this isn't missing the mark, or maybe it's not getting there as fast as I want. So maybe I'm just not having the right amount of patience. And that gives us that third party space to define kind of what we're talking about. And at the end of the day, you may think that it is missing the mark, but at least you've considered the evidence for your own impatience there. But that requires a lot of introspection, and I'm not so great at it.
Listen, it's a learned behavior, I think, for everybody. And so we're all learning. And there's some things that I don't have patience for. And that's a whole other session of like, why don't I have patience for that? But I have myriad patience for mini games over here. Like, what is it? That's a deep cut.
That is great.
So we go from this very lighthearted moment to the end of this episode.
So then they smash their face in with a brick.
Boom. That's it.
But that's this game, and that's this show.
That is.
It's the joke. It's the joke book, and then like you're crushing something later. Yeah. I mean, it's the scene in the spaceship and the journal and everything, and it's watching someone's head get caved in with a golf club.
Oh my gosh,
they're this radical contrast in like narrative form.
It is. So Ellie goes into the basement, elevator shaft sequence, cool action sequence. They go into the basement. The red lights, well, they're not quite on because first Ellie sees spores for herself. And she's able to be like, oh my gosh, they're airborne. But also she has a superpower, like we said at the top of this episode. Right.
Cool way to display it too. We see the people that we assume were the ones from the thing that said seal us in. And so that means that they've been there from however long that episode was. So we don't know. Do we know the total length of time that passed from the cold open to present day?
I don't know.
We don't know if that's right at the start of the infection where they did it, or if it's later. It's not really relevant, but we try and be detail oriented where we can.
Well, it's with whatever her name is, Harriet the Hammer. I don't think that's her name, but in my head, what is it that Isaac called her when he got out of the tank in the last episode? I want to say it's Harriet the Hammer.
Oh, I don't remember. I don't. Yeah, I have to look it up.
Josh Peck and Harriet the Hammer. So anyway,
okay. We'll find out.
We introduced the spores. They are all over the place. Ellie is unfazed. She turns on the red lights.
They rule. It rules.
It just rules, and it's so good. And so then she hears this wheezing and gasping, and you see Nora fending for her life. Okay, like, and Ellie is unfazed, and this is when it all clicks for Nora. But there's a huge revelation in this sequence as well, and it's just, oh gosh, it's so good. Nora realizes, you're the immune girl. It was real. Like, we'd heard about this, but nobody really believed it. But like, it's you, and Ellie just kind of nods, just stone-faced, and she continues to approach. And all she says is, "Where's Abby? Where's Abby?" Over and over and over again. It is wild to see this sequence. Nora begins to tell a little bit. Do you know what he did? He killed everyone in that hospital. He killed the doctor, Abby's father, right? He was the only one that could have taken what you have and given it to the entire world. And so, do you know how many lives this cost? Do you know what he did?
Wow.
And Ellie responds, Evan, like, and this was just like the mic drop for me. I know. And this, so I don't know if she says that. I don't think she says that in the game.
I don't think so.
But this is clear, like, replaying the game now with the lens of Ellie knows what Joel did at this point as kind of the rift in some ways. That's kind of the big reveal of this episode. That Ellie's like, yeah, I know that he squandered all of humanity in a vaccine for me.
And that's 5 episodes of tension from the end of the last season to now that have kind of been the undercurrent of this. What did Ellie know, and when did she know it? If I were to make an allusion to that, it's almost like a Watergate, right? What did she know, and when did she know it? And that is where the episode ends up resolving. And before we get there, she tries to potentially extract some more information from
Abby?
Nora here. Yeah. What do you make of their conversation a little bit? And what else do you want to cover before we kind of jump into the brutality of that scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of it. You know, Ellie knows, and I think that's where we're going next, right? Yeah. Like the story of what were Joel and Ellie before this moment, after season 1 up to now. What was their story? I think that's where we're going next, as seen in the very final scenes. But Ellie has squashed down all of that shred of humanity that she has and is just, again, hell-bent on triangulation in this revenge narrative. Where's Abby? No. And so Ellie grabs a pipe and then proceeds to torture Nora in order to extract this information. Now, this is where we probably need to talk about some of that brutality. Evan?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think let's just go ahead and say where the episode ends, and then I'll just kind of talk about this as a side concept. And then that way, if they're not interested in hearing about it, then
in the midst of this torture sequence, Nora's not giving up information about Abby. Ellie takes a pipe and begins to bludgeon Nora over and over and over again. Then the scene goes to black, and we see a very serene scene, Ellie waking up in her bedroom, and you just see a figure come to the doorway, and it's Joel, and he says, "Hey, kiddo." And Ellie just has the biggest childish smile on her face, and then it cuts to black, and it's like, oh, and that's why I'm like, next episode is how we know and what was their journey. The game goes through so many flashbacks at various points, and it's going to be interesting to see how they may put them all in one episode. So, you know me from season 1, I hate flashback episodes. I'm pretty excited about this next one.
It's going to be interesting to see how much of it we get. The way that it times up, you know, we got 8 episodes this season, or 7?
7, yeah.
There's only 7 episodes this season?
Yeah, so we've got the penultimate episode next week, and then whatever the finale will be.
So, it'll be interesting to see how much we move the plot forward, or we move just kind of the ideas forward here. But this episode went by very quickly.
It did.
The pacing was quick, and we were kind of back to that quicker pacing. And so one thing that we wanted to talk about a little bit was the difference between what Ellie does and then what some things have been done in the past in the show.
Yeah.
It's very clear that Ellie is trying to extract information from Nora. She's trying to interrogate her. She's trying to investigate where Abby might be. But it's very clear that Nora is not going to give that information up. Nora is dead. Nora is going to die.
she's done.
Nora's fate is sealed. Ellie does not need to kill Nora nor inflict any more pain. There is nothing else that's going to happen. Nora will expire and turn into a cordyceps zombie regardless of what else happens. Right. That is established.
She's done. Yeah.
But Ellie makes the decision to inflict pain anyways. Is that necessary? Why did she do that? And where does that juxtapose against some of the things, methods of interrogation versus torture that the show has talked about? And so we talked a little bit about this episode, and we said, okay, so if we're going to talk about this idea of torture and the portrayal of torture in media, there's a couple of things that we just have to be upfront with. One, for us, it's a little problematic that we would talk about that the only time a woman is the character that's doing it. And Joel has done this in the past, and we haven't talked about it. So we see that, we know that. However, there's two contrasts between Joel's interrogation and the versus the torture and the pain. And I think that Ellie is the one who's pulling from the lessons that she's learned from Joel here. And so that's why we're going to talk about it now and why we didn't talk about it before previously. So Joel shows two methods of interrogation. Do you want to talk about the difference between the scene in the cabin with the older couple and then the same method that he uses to figure out some information later in that episode?
Well, I think that either one is particularly crude and problematic. But with Joel's, it is a strategic determining of a location. Right? Are you saying the exact same thing that your friend is saying? Like this is a pretty, dare I say, clever, although it is problematic way of getting information. Ellie's, meanwhile, is not very clever. It's very much, I'm going to beat the truth out of you.
Yeah.
And what it strikes me at PAX this last weekend, I was part of a panel that talked about masculinity. And how does one, like, what are depictions in media about masculinity and how is masculinity kind of developed and all that kind of stuff? And one of the things that kind of came up in the panel that I brought up and really took a lot from, I guess, was this idea that masculinity is something that is identified by one person and emulated by that person. And oftentimes it is bestowed upon you by another person. This is an interesting point here for a couple of reasons. In the last episode, Ellie, upon seeing Dina's pregnancy test, says, I'm going to be a dad, right? And in this episode, she is rekindling and reminding herself in a couple of ways of Joel, and here she's emulating Joel. But the problem is, this was not a fatherly, and I know that, it's gender bending a little bit here, but this is not a masculinity that is being bestowed upon Ellie from Joel, but it's one that Ellie, in her limited perception, has been seeing from Joel, and here she is emulating to honor him.
Yeah, it's complicated, right?
It's incredibly complicated.
If you're watching this and you're like, I don't know if I totally agree with that. That's kind of the point of why they're telling the story this way, is that it's complicated and we're talking about it. And so it's creating this third space for us to explore ideas. So there's times in this journey where we talk about things and on this show where we'll say, this is what the research says, this is what it is, this is what we know, this is kind of the evidence. Then there's times where we'll say, this is really complicated. This is an evolving school of thought in some circles. We want to be able to create a space to talk about it, so we're going to talk about it, but we recognize that people are going to have a difference of opinion, and we want to show respect to different perspectives, but it's not going to stop us from talking about it. 100%. So we're going to talk about it. And so I think that it, in some ways, is another off-ramp that Ellie chooses not to take. Yeah. Because we've seen that Joel has modeled kind of the two suspects in the other room as a cop, like, you better tell me what your buddy tells me or else you're going to go to jail. Yeah. And the cop goes into the other room and says, what happened? You better tell me what your buddy told me, or if their stories don't match up, then you're going to go to jail. But the consequence of going to jail for your own behavior as subject to punishment by a judge and a trial among your peers and assuming a fair trial is very different than if you don't tell me what to do, I'm going to harm you.
Harm you, yeah.
I'm going to use violence and brutality, and I'm going to take away your humanity by using violence against you, right? So there's a difference between the natural consequences of our actions in the laws as defined by society, assuming a just legal system, and taking that judgment and putting yourself on that seat of judgment in your own hands, right? That vigilante type of justice. Now, one thing that we wanted to talk about is just the idea of torture in media. There's been a lot of research that has gone into the portrayal of torture as an effective method for extraction of information and whether that's actually true and what responsibility the media has and storytellers have in conveying what is accurate about the way that torture is conveyed and its effectiveness. The research shows, and Amnesty International has a really long article and section about torture. I'll just read the title of it. It says, torture is barbaric, inhumane, and has no place in society. So they're pretty much putting it right out front how they feel about it. But the research and the examples in it show the ineffectiveness of torture as a method to actually extract accurate information. People will say anything to make the pain stop. And so in order to not perpetuate the inhumanity of the information that we're trying to extract from an individual, in media, a lot of the time, it's shown as effective. Cause someone enough pain and they're going to cough up the answer to stop it. Threaten something that somebody loves and they're going to do anything to stop it. And the ends justify the means. Very Machiavellian, utilitarian, if we go back to our philosophical approach with Joshua Horn that he would talk about, right? And so torture is not, as far as the research shows, an effective method in extracting accurate information. And the information that it extracts is not treated as reliable. That's what the data shows. That's what we understand about humanity and about the psychology behind it currently. Could it be effective? I don't know. But over time, they say it's really not. It's not the best way to figure out what it is. So there has to be the question that is asked in the criticism of the way that media portrays it as an effective method. It's Hollywood. It's not accurate. But what does that do for our psyche when we see a character do that and we go, oh yeah, just cause him pain so that you'll get the answer that you want and so it works. And so what is coming off of the screen and what are we absorbing, synthesizing, or criticizing in our own lives when it comes to the perpetuation of really truly evil that exists in the world in this context? Amnesty does a better job outlining it and all the details than we can, but I think it's important to bring up here because Ellie had a choice to take an off-ramp and she didn't.
It strikes me that even while I was watching it, I kept thinking to myself, gosh, Ellie's going to regret this. Like, this is a moment. And I think that if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever seen interviews with people that were called upon to do kind of heinous acts in war and torturing and for the purpose of intelligence and intel. But there is just a sadness and a regret, a remorse, and it's like the things that I had to do, I hated that I did them, and like I'll never get past that. And so, not only, and I don't know any of this other than what we've just kind of researched a little bit, but I don't know how much it works or doesn't work. But what I do know is that it leaves oftentimes very difficult, if not irreparable, harm to the individual that's doing it. And so this show quickly for me is about preserving humanity. If season 1 was about saving humanity, season 2 is about how do you preserve your humanity. And Ellie was preserved by Joel, and now she's not preserving herself. And I think that is like, there's a scene in the game, and I don't remember exactly when it happens, but someone says to Ellie, you wasted it. And there's a double entendre, the vaccine, and then also the life that she's been given. And it's like, how is this show doing that? And like, is Ellie wasting the life that she could have? And I'm of the mindset of, yeah, she is. Because you've got Dina and you've got Jackson, and yes, there's incredible pain, but there is a life that you can still live. So
I think that's exactly it. And it is complicated. And I think the show attempts to portray it in a way that asks questions that we then answer in discussion in our own understanding. So the show has given an invitation to discuss it, and it's clearly trying to say something. And it's always a pleasure to analyze this and stories like this with you. So thanks for your time and your expertise. Everybody, thanks for watching. And we know that it's complicated, and we're not going to get it right. And we're going to learn and grow over the next few years as well. So these are those things where when we find those opportunities and those doors are opened and the invitation is given to understand, be curious, and grow, we want to try and walk through them. That's what we model together. So we get that it's complicated too, and we hope that you're along for the ride with us.
And we're asking you to chime in as well. And so if we are wrong, or if you have another thought or an idea or a thesis or something that we missed here, we'd love for you to put it in the comments, and let's start a discussion down in the comments section. Again, we'll discuss more next week as we continue the Last of Us lecture series. And with that, when you are lost in the darkness, look for the light.
Look for the red light.
Look for the red light. See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks to Husky by the Geek for our theme music. Thanks to Nick Smith for our graphics. But most of all, thanks to you. This program is brought to you by viewers like you, and we appreciate you tuning in. Thanks so much for following along with us on this Last of Us series this semester. Even as it comes to wrap down, we hope that this has been something that's made you reflect on your life, but we hope that your life is going great. Whatever it is that you're approaching and looking at this week, we hope it goes great. We're in your corner, and others are in your corner too. You got this. Have a great rest of your week. See you next episode. Bye-bye.